Right now, Pittsburgh's best sports show is about to begin. Call us or tweet us. We've got things to talk about on the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome inside the Fan Cave. This is the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call. We do it 7 nights a week, so don't be a stranger. Call us at 412-575-2600. That's the number, of course, of the Bordis and Bordis hotline. Hit us up on Twitter at KDPomp, at the Pony Express. Andrew Fillipponi up at 93.7 The Fan, part of the PM team on air today. I'm sure we're going to get into the Penguins in a bit. They won again. That's 5 in a row. After the break, we'll break them down and talk about what they have done here ever since they started 3-6, and people were getting a little antsy. They put it together. We'll get into that. But first, I want to talk about Ken Dorsey getting fired in Buffalo, Andrew. Last night we watched once again as an NFL game went down to the final play, although a penalty, 12 men on the field for Buffalo, which is not Ken Dorsey's responsibility, ended up costing them a redo on the kick, and they ended up making it, and Denver goes there and wins. So Buffalo now 5-5, all 5 losses in the AFC. But how in the world is it his fault that they make all these turnovers when they're second in the NFL in yards and fourth in scoring?
Well, how was it Todd Haley's fault when the Steelers lost a playoff game 45-42 and was fired right after that, Bob? Do you have the answer to that one?
Scapegoat. I think the only way I can put a bow on all of these is a scapegoat. They needed to do something, and that's what they chose to do.
You know, in the Bills situation, their offense, we saw it in August when you did the game, something just hasn't looked right with them, even going back to then. Josh Allen's been running for his life. It seems like every play is just old school backyard football, draw it up in the dirt, try to make a play out of nothing. And we saw with the Steelers, that got very frustrating when you're dealing with a quarterback in his prime and you're subjecting him to that type of stuff. And you see from Allen's turnovers and the way he looks after those plays that it's getting to him. So actually, Bob, even though Dorsey didn't deserve to get fired because of the 12 men on the field, I do think in the end it might be a good thing for Buffalo because they needed something, I think, to shake them out of this. It might not work, but it reminds me of like when the Penguins have fired head coaches mid-season. You're looking for a spark or something to change what you're doing, and it's a last resort. It's a desperate move. Without it, I don't think the Bills were going to make the playoffs. Maybe they still won't, but at least they're trying something bold.
Yeah, but I don't think they will either. These 5 losses, just as I look at Cincinnati coming up on Thursday night, this big game between the Ravens and the Bengals. If they lose again, that'd be 1-5 in the conference with 0-3 in the division. I don't think anyone can pull out of that, can they? You'd have to run the table to avoid all the tiebreakers.
Talking about the Bills, Bob?
No, talking about the Bengals.
You're saying?
Same thing with the Bengals. If they lose all these games in conference and in division specifically, it's going to be hard to overcome it.
Well, I think Cincinnati's in it. I think Cincinnati put themselves in a position where they really need to win Thursday because they get swept by Baltimore. In addition to what's left on their schedule, or they've got, I think, a trip to Jacksonville still looming. They still got to play Kansas City, a first place versus first place matchup. They still got to come here. And they actually don't do well against the Browns, oddly enough. They've already lost to them, and they're going to play them in the last week of the season. So I agree. I think of all the teams in the division, actually, Bob, I'm going to say this. I think the team that loses the Bengals-Ravens game is probably worse off than even the team that loses the Steelers-Browns matchup on Sunday.
Yeah, it's interesting to look ahead now because that's what we do. But I can see a scenario, and I think I told you this last night, Pony, where they could be at 9-5 with 3 games left. Do you see it sort of playing out that way for them? I mean, even if they split these next 2, they have 2 very winnable games, both at home against 2 bad teams. That seems reasonable, right?
I do. I agree with you on that, Bob. And then it's just a matter of how many of those last 3 games are they going to need to win to get in. I think 2 wins would absolutely get them in at 11. I think 10, you're probably good, but who knows? You know, maybe at that point, the game you lost to Houston could come into play. If they get to 10 wins, that might be something that we have to look at. The Colts game on the road, I think is a testy one. Indy's played much better on the road than at home this season, but Gardner Minshew is the type of quarterback that can win you a game or lose a game, and their defense can rise up to the occasion. We saw them go to Baltimore and win this year. So that might end up being the swing game, Bob.
Yep.
of all the games on their schedule in the second half, that random Colts game, which we don't know if it's going to be on a Saturday or a Sunday, whenever they play that game, in conference, that might end up being a make-or-break game for the Steelers when it's all said and done.
Very interesting, as always. It's going to go right down the wire with all these teams. When we come back, we'll talk about the Penguins and also the developing story out of England involving former Penguin Adam Johnson. There were charges issued today. We'll get into that. Want your opinions on all of it? Call us at 412-575-2600. Also on 93.7 The Fan, we simulcast this program. It's the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call. Pony and I are back right after this.